Good afternoon. I'm Chip Partner, Assistant VP for Communications at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Welcome everyone to our discussion today. Back in May, we announced that Rochester was one of 4 sites in the US for a phase 1 clinical trial for a COVID-19 vaccine being developed by Pfizer and a German biotech company. Today, we are here to announce that URMC is beginning recruitment for a phase 3 trial of another vaccine candidate that we anticipate will start here in Rochester in August. Phase 3 is the final stage of testing prior to FDA approval, manufacturing, and distribution. We're joined in our studio today by 2 leaders of the study, Dr. Ann Falsey, a professor of the Department of Medicine and Infectious Diseases, who is co-director of the URMC Vaccine and Treatment Evaluation Unit, or VTEU, and Dr. Angela Branch, an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine and Infectious Disease Division, also co-director of the VTEU. And we're delighted to be joined also via Zoom by Dr. Mike Mendoza, the Monroe County Commissioner for Public Health. There's Dr. Mendoza, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask the media today, if you could please keep your questions for Dr. Mendoza and for Dr. Branch and Dr. Falsey focused on vaccines when we start out. If we have additional time, I think Dr. Mendoza will be willing to answer questions on some other topics related to COVID-19, but let's start by focusing on the vaccine trial in August. Also want to thank our interpreters today, Will and Chris, and Morgan Underwood, who's directs the ASL interpretation department. With that, I'll ask Dr. Falsey or Dr. Branch, do you want to kick this off for us?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having us. I would like to start out by thanking the Rochester community for the overwhelming response we got when we announced the Pfizer trial. And I'm happy to report that that trial, the phase 1 trial, has been completed. In phase 1, we were looking for just small numbers of very healthy people, but that's moving very rapidly into phase 2 and then onward to phase 3. So the reason that we wanted to reach out again is that for phase 3 trials, we're going to be looking for many more volunteers. We're expanding the numbers and the types of people with stable medical conditions, but also we want people with diverse backgrounds and ethnicities and living circumstances. And we're looking for folks that are really on the front lines that could perceive themselves by circumstance or occupation to be at higher risk for coronavirus. And so we're beginning this now, even though we're not going to start the trial until August, because again, we expect that we'll have a wonderful response from our community, and it takes time to really screen people and get them in the queue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Falsey. And Dr. Mendoza, we're really appreciative of you being here because this is a community effort to help in the hunt for a successful vaccine. So perhaps you could say a few words about the vaccine trial and then we'll open it up for questions.
Great, thank you, Chip. And again, thank you to Dr. Falsey and Dr. Branch for inviting me to join you today for this very important announcement for our community. Since the arrival of COVID-19 in Monroe County, our community has come together in unprecedented ways to fight this pandemic together. Many among us have made sacrifices, putting our lives on the line to take risks for others, to help others to stay healthy, to maintain services that are critical to the health and well-being of Monroe County. We've offered our time, our talents, we've adapted our businesses to produce life-saving products. We've created partnerships to strengthen our response to this pandemic. We've covered our faces, we've kept our distance, and so far, it's working. We've flattened the curve, and now we are reopening our economy, reopening our community, and resuming many of the activities that we enjoyed before the outbreak. But we are not done. We do not have a cure. This virus will remain a serious concern until we have a vaccine that can help us to stop it, like we have done with influenza, measles, polio, and many other vaccine-preventable illnesses. We are blessed in this community to have world-class institutions contributing to this hunt for a COVID vaccine. Our scientists are part of a small group of scientists worldwide who are doing this life-saving research, but they need your help because without your help, we will not be able to establish the efficacy of this vaccine. And ultimately, that's what we want to do together. So I urge you to find out if you are eligible to participate in this vaccine trial and to sign up if you are. This is the only way a vaccine will make it to the market, if enough volunteers come forward to help us to demonstrate that it in fact does work and does help to prevent COVID-19 infection. I can assure you that this vaccine is safe. It has gone through all of the proper protocols, phase 1 and phase 2, to establish safety. And right now in phase 3, our goal is to establish efficacy. Dr. Falsey and Dr. Branch and their teams are highly respected across the nation and across the globe for doing this work. And it is especially important that we recruit a set of volunteers that represent the diversity of the Rochester and Monroe County community. We know that underrepresented minorities are also underrepresented in research. And the only way we're going to know if this vaccine is effective for the diverse population is to enroll a diverse population among the study candidates. We know how quickly COVID can spread far and wide, threatening our lives and our livelihoods. The risk of another surge in Monroe County remains real until we have a vaccine. So we still need to come together, as we have for the previous 6 months, to work together again in unprecedented ways to fight this infection. We are not done, so I encourage you, please, to volunteer to work with the University of Rochester Medical Center on this very important study. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mendoza. We've got quite a few reporters on the line, and the first to join us today was Kayla Green from WROC TV Channel 8. Kayla, you want to ask the first question?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. My first question would just be, whoever really wants to answer it, but if you could explain the difference between the phase 1 and the phase 3 vaccine. With it being phase 3, does this then mean that it's closer to actually being on the market, or how close are we?
Dr. Branch will take that.
Sure, and I just want to also just thank Dr. Mendoza, who just beautifully summarized what this is all about and what our efforts are looking and hoping to achieve over the next couple of months. So phases of vaccine trials typically start at the preclinical stage, which is when we test it in animal models and in the lab to see if it does produce the immune response that we're interested in and if there are any major safety concerns. After that, it moves into phase 1, and phase 1 is typically in a small group of people, usually a couple of hundred people. And the goal of that is to really understand what the appropriate dose of the vaccine is that gives you the least amount of side effects and is relatively safe, but also produces an immune response or a potentially protective defense response that will protect you against getting infection. After that, we move into phase 2, and sometimes phase 1 and phase 2 are sort of a little bit fluid in that they move very quickly from one to the other. And phase 2 studies typically look at, again, similar things, safety, and again, the immune response, but in a larger group of people. So after testing in about 100 to 150, we then tested in 1,000 to 2,000 people to, again, make sure that we've chosen the right dose, which gives you that perfect balance between providing an immune response or a defense response, but also being safe and well tolerated. Then we move into phase 3 trials. Phase 3 trials are what we call efficacy trials, and efficacy trials tell us, does this vaccine work in preventing infection? Does it give a good enough immune response that it will protect the person who's received the vaccine from becoming infected, or if they were infected, from having a very severe disease? And so the stages that we're talking about right now, or the stage that we're moving into this summer, is phase 3. If a vaccine is proven effective in phase 3, that's more or less the definitive trial that we then present to the FDA, and the FDA would then move forward with licensure if they were satisfied with the data. So phase 3 is sort of where we hope to be before we start, before we get FDA approval and then start large-scale manufacturing and distribution.
Kayla, I'm going to ask if we can move along, because we do have a lot of reporters. If you have a follow-up, we can come back to you. And next to sign up was Patty Singer from Minority Reporter newspaper. Patty, welcome.
Hi, Chip. So what will be the outreach in minority communities if diversity is so essential to making sure this works across populations? how will you attract Black and brown people to participate in the study?
So hi, Patty. Thanks for asking that question. That's actually really a very important goal of ours. We know that minority populations are disproportionately being affected by COVID-19. So any vaccine candidate, any vaccine efficacy study we do has to include that population because we want to protect minorities against becoming infected. So, this is our first line, sort of this mass media and traditional media approach. Certainly many people have access to television. We'll also be advertising on the radio. We'll be doing social media posts for sort of the younger generation. But we're partnering with community leaders within Rochester community, particularly within the downtown community, to try to reach people in ways that are not traditional. We understand that there may be some distrust in certain communities with science, with government, with academics, with research, with the hospital in general. And we want to really work to dispel any mistrust that there might be, and for people to really understand why this is important and why we need their help and their participation. So we'll be reaching out to community leaders, to churches, to various different organizations like food banks. We're really going to try to talk to people who are in these communities and who understand what's the best way to approach your community. How can we talk to them? What kinds of information will they need? We're going to have discussion groups. We're starting one, I think, as early as next week with some local community leaders and community members and participants. And we'll hopefully go from there and be able to really, speak the language that people need to hear to understand why this is important and why we need their help.
Thank you.
And Patty, since you opened the door, the PR guy is going to shamelessly plug our website, www.covidresearch, that's all together, .urmc.edu, and a phone number for people that don't have internet access, 276-5212. Mark Michaud on our team will send this out to everyone afterward, but again, it's covidresearch.urmc.edu, and the phone number 585-276-5212.
You'll get my bill, Chip.
You opened the door. Thank you. And next I see Pat Mucinek from WHEC TV Channel 10. Pat, do you have a question?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I know you're looking for 1,000 volunteers, but how old is too young and how old is too old to take part in the study?
So although we do appreciate there's increasing recognition that children are affected by COVID, these are the first trials will be in adults. So you have to be 18 years or older. And presently, there is no upper limit if you are in stable, good health. We don't discriminate against age. In fact, in many of the trials that are moving forward, there is a desire to have at least 25% of the study population being over the age of 65.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I see Spectrum News on. Is Spectrum, did you have a reporter or a producer that wants to ask a question? Can you unmute Spectrum? Spectrum must just be rolling on this. And how about 13 WHAM Television?
Yes, hi, Dan Schrack with 13 WHAM News. How are you all today?
Welcome, thank you.
Good, good. Listen, so my question is, I think a lot of people might be hesitant, especially if you've never taken part in any sort of clinical trial in the past. What do you tell people to kind of calm that hesitancy or that fear? And additionally, with the previous trials of this vaccination, have there been any side effects?
So I'll start and then maybe Ann can talk a little bit more about it. I think that we do have a lot of experience of doing phase 1 to 3 trials for various different vaccine candidates. The study we're talking about right now is phase 3, so it's important that potential study participants understand that in order for it to make it to phase 3, it's really gone through very rigorous study in phase 1 and phase 2. In those earlier trials, we do a lot of monitoring of our subjects. It's actually pretty intense. And the main reason is to make sure that anything that we're going to put into thousands of people to test, that it's safe, that it's not going to produce serious adverse effects that potentially are harmful to them. And so anything that makes it to this stage has already been rigorously tested. And I think that that's sort of the first thing that we'd want them to know to calm them down. And secondly, we are going to continue to monitor subjects in trials. Like they become sort of like our family or our kids. We follow them very, very closely. And we're as interested in their well-being as they are.
And just to add to that, all of the pharmaceutical companies work very closely with the FDA, and they have to, every time they move up in a stage, they have to present their data to the FDA, and it has to meet certain standards to move into the next phase of trials. And all the trials have what we call data safety monitoring boards that are watching for any kind of untoward side effects in real time.
And if I could add, as a member of the Greater Rochester Practice-Based Research Network, that I want to make a special call out to my colleagues in primary care medicine, because we encounter many patients today. In fact, I can think of a handful of patients that I saw this morning who would have been great candidates to be a part of this study. And so I think while the researchers and the research might seem obscure and distant to many, I think to the extent that we as primary care clinicians can work with our patients who we know quite well, to convince them of the importance of doing research, because this isn't about experimenting, this is about finding a cure. And truly, if we can find a diverse population upon whom we can evaluate the efficacy of this vaccine, I think in the end that's a good thing for our community.
Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. I'm going to go back around for follow-up questions on vaccines, and I know we've got some folks covering this internally at the university. If you have questions, you want to add them in chat, or if you just want to ask them verbally, please just let us know via chat, and we'll be happy to acknowledge you. But I'll go back to where we started. Kayla Green at Chin Lake, do you have another question related to the vaccine trial coming up?
Hi, yes, I do have another one. So I was going to ask Dr. Mendoza, I know you've previously said that you would like to see a vaccine to feel comfortable reopening schools, for example. So with this news, how does that relate to what you've said in the past?
I still long for the day for a vaccine. And I think it's probably not realistic to expect that the vaccine will be in place by this fall. And so while the work to develop a vaccine is ongoing, I don't think we simply just want to wait for the vaccine in order to move forward. I think we need to move forward in little steps all along the way, because the future isn't guaranteed. And I think we have to figure out now, what can we do to stack the odds in our favor to reopen anything as safely as possible. And I think the schools are a great example. We do not want to keep the schools closed any longer than we must to protect the kids' safety. But we've got to balance that against the risks of not having school. And those risks are very real. And so, certainly a vaccine on the horizon is important, but it cannot be the only thing that we wait for, because the urgency of getting our kids back to school is also very, very real.
Thanks, Kayla. And Patty, do you have another question related to the vaccine trial?
Not related to the vaccine trial. Can I sneak something else in?
I'll ask if we can wait until the end.
Right. Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Dr. Branch and Dr. Falsey go when we're done talking.
Yeah, my question would be for Dr. Mendoza, so go ahead. Yep.
Thanks. Pat Musinec, do you have another question related to vaccines?
No, same here. I have questions for Dr. Mendoza, but I'll wait till the end.
And Dan Schrack at 13 WAM?
Nope, just follow-up questions outside of the vaccine.
Okay, so again, you left the door open for the PR guy. Before we let Dr. Falsey and Dr. Branch go, we talked briefly in the opening about the Pfizer vaccine trial, which is separate from this one. I wonder if one of you could give an update on where we are with the Pfizer vaccine trial, and then what other vaccines we might be looking at in August.
Sure. So the Pfizer vaccine trial is not part of Operation Warp Speed. They're operating outside of that. And we've completed phase 1 with the help of the people in this community. And it's the initial results, which have been published, look very promising, that it's producing a good immune response. So it's moving quickly into phase 2. and then hopefully into phase 3 later this summer. The other studies that Dr. Branch and I are doing are through the vaccine treatment evaluation units that are part of the NIH consortium and what we call Operation Warp Speed, and there will be large efficacy trials. Those are ones that have now moved on. Again, later this summer and into the fall with the major pharmaceutical companies.
Anything to add, Dr. Branch, relative to the vaccine trials?
Just that, again, we will be doing a phase 3 sometime later this summer, probably in August. We are looking for at least 1,000 people, which means that we'll probably have to screen about twice that number. And we're hoping to have a very diverse population that includes people who are at risk for contracting the infection. It could be as simple as someone who rides the bus every day and comes into close contact with lots of people. And so, you know, we're hoping to be able to start getting ready for that, because once it starts, it's just going to be a whirlwind of vaccinations and follow-ups, and again, looking to make sure all our subjects are safe. And you probably heard some things about Operation Warp Speed on the news. Some of the vaccines have been announced by the director of the NIH, Dr. Tony Fauci, one of the directors. And most likely it'll be one of these large trials that Operation Warp Speed has identified as the target vaccines that the NIH is most interested in pursuing.
Is Rochester a relatively small community to have 2 major vaccine trials taking place at the same time? It seems like a good thing about being in Rochester, being part of this.
Well, you know, Rochester has a very rich history of vaccine development and has always been a leader. So we are used to doing these kind of trials, and you know, I think we are recognized for our work, and they come to us. You know, whoever mentioned the schools opening up, I'll put in a shameless plug. I think, you know, teachers, we'd love to have teachers in our studies to participate in the vaccine trials. But one thing I've been hearing that I find really interesting, and it's nice to hear, is some of our older vaccine volunteers that have been coming through for the Pfizer trial, when they say why they're doing it, they hearken back to their childhood, and they're giving back because they remember the polio pioneers that helped bring forward polio vaccines. So they really see it as doing their part to end this, you know, terrible pandemic.
Well, I want to thank both of our faculty members, Dr. Ann Falsey and Dr. Angela Branch, both with the Department of Medicine Infectious Disease Division, and both co-directors of the URMC Vaccine and Treatment Evaluation Unit. And before we switch gears to Dr. Mendoza, I am again going to repeat our website, www.covidresearch.urmc.edu, and the phone number 585-276-5212. Thank you, doctors, very much. And before we let Dr. Mendoza out of the hot seat, I know there's some other questions for him. And Dr. Mendoza, before we change to questions, did you have statements not related to the vaccine statement that you might want to open with?
Sure. Great. Thanks, Chip. And again, thank you all to the members of our media who are here today. You know, it feels like there is so much that happens every day, and it's hard to keep up with communicating with all you. So I appreciate any opportunity that we can create to make that connection. But first, I want to share with all of you sort of my view on where we are right now, and give you a little flavor of my thinking in terms of where we are and where I think we're going. As you all have seen, our new case number has remained relatively steady in terms of overall numbers. I'll get into some of the details in a little bit. The number of people in the hospital, the number of people in the ICU, the number of people who are on the ventilator has dropped significantly in the last month, and you've seen that, and we're seeing some of the lowest numbers that we've seen in months now, which is good news. And I want to say all of this has happened, this improvement has happened all in the face of reopening. So while I think it's tempting to look for all of the trends and possible surges that might have happened here or there, I think in the balance of things, we have not seen a surge in spite of all of the events of the last, 4 to 6 weeks. We've had holidays, Mother's Day, Memorial Day. We had the weekend of protests and rallies, which are ongoing in our community. We've had reopening of phase 2, now phase 3, and into phase 4. And in spite of all of this, our numbers have remained flat. So I do think that there, is reason to feel a sense of reassurance. But I guess I'd couch that in a sort of a cautious reassurance, because I don't think we're out of the woods yet. And you've heard me say that since February. We are not out of the woods yet. But I do think that we are protected by a number of things. Number one is that the prevalence in this community remains relatively low. By our best estimates, about 2% of the community is thought to be positive for COVID-19, which means in a group of 100 people, 98 people are quote unquote safe. The challenge, of course, is that nobody knows which of the 100 people, which of the 98 people are those in that group who are safe. And so it makes sense still to take appropriate precautions. And I think the precautions that we have taken to date have been the reason why, in addition to having a low prevalence, we've not seen the surges here in Monroe County that we saw earlier this spring and that we're seeing, unfortunately, across the country. So to get into the details around the newer cases, because I think some of these nuances are worth paying attention to, worth letting the public know about. Number one is very clear that we've seen an increase in the number of cases among 20 and 30-year-olds, the younger population. This is not surprising. As restaurants, as bars open, I think we're seeing more people interact. One thing I will say is that even though we look to find commonalities across these interactions and across these cases, it really does seem to be that it's gatherings that matter. It doesn't so much matter where the gathering happens. It's just that the people are gathering. So I think what's risky is the people, not necessarily the place. And so I think we need to think about our individual behaviors, our individual choices, more so than the circumstances or the venue or the restaurant or the name of the bar and so forth. Those venues are what facilitate these interactions. And at the end of the day, we've got to take precautions in those interactions. Make no mistake, the restaurants, the bars, the venues all have to take their appropriate precautions as well. But as we look through the data and look to see how people have been contracting this infection, it really is person-to-person interaction as best that we can tell. So I want to emphasize it's us as the people, not so much the places that are really ought to be the focus for trying to prevent future spread. Along with having more people in their 20s, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of contacts per case. So the cases are people with confirmed infection. And then when we do our case investigations, we identify the contacts of people who may have been exposed to that case. And then we evaluate their risk, put them under quarantine if needed, and we follow them forward for 14 days to make sure that they remain healthy. The number of contacts per case has gone up, much more so than earlier in the spring, which again is no surprise. As people are coming together, they're gathering in groups of people that are larger, and that's been permitted by the governor and all the way on down. And so that shouldn't be surprising. But it does mean that the work of contact tracing has been a little bit more busy. And I do think the onus on the public to remain under quarantine, to abide by our guidelines, is all the more important. We really are trusting the public to take care of the community, because when we identify somebody at risk and we place you under quarantine, it's not because we want to, it's because we have to. We need to do that in order to protect public health. And we realize that it's inconvenient, that it can disrupt your life again, but I have to come back at the very end and say, what would be more disruptive? 14 days of quarantine for an individual, or going back to phase one and locking down the community like we did in March? I think we can all agree that these simple precautions, while disruptive, are a far preferable option than to have to go back to square one. And the other facet that has really occupied our attention this week is the governor's advisories around travel. I believe we're now up to 16 states from whom travelers, whether they're residents of Monroe County going out and back, or whether these are visitors from other states coming in, they all represent potentially a risk. And so our emphasis really is around prevention and education and providing guidance and relying on people to do the right thing. As I've said in the past, we are not trying to be the enforcement agency. We're trying to simply educate people and rely on everybody's better judgment to take care of one another. But the reality is, upon arriving in the community, we really ask anybody who's coming in from any of those higher risk states to remain under quarantine as much as possible. And we are taking a higher standard. The state has recommended that we, all counties, take a precautionary quarantine route. But here in Monroe County, I've elected to be a little more stringent and to implement a mandatory quarantine. which allows us to make daily calls to check in on people, to evaluate how people are doing, and hopefully provide better education to the public. So with all of that ongoing, I thought I'd just open up the floor to some questions.
Okay, maybe we'll go in the same order we did before with the reporters, and if anyone else wants to ask a question, if you just let us know in chat, we'd appreciate it. So as we started, Kayla Green from WROC TVA, do you have a question for Dr. Mendoza?
Yes, so mine goes along with what you were just talking about the other states, and Governor Cuomo mentioned yesterday that specifically people coming in from other states to here could be a problem. We can quarantine ourselves if we go to other states, but do you have concerns about people who are shutting down again, say down south, and they're coming up here and bringing it with them?
I do. You know, at this point, every other state is a higher risk than us. You know, we have, for better or worse, we've gone through this first, and we've flattened the curve first. And so, you know, to some degree, we're sitting ducks as it regards to being reinfected by other people coming in from other states. And so, to the extent that almost every other state has a higher prevalence rate than we do, really visitors from any other state, you know, are concerning, and obviously the states with the higher prevalence are more concerning. You know, at the end of the day, again, we rely on people coming in to do the right thing. You know, anybody who's a resident of Monroe County who's gone to one of these states and has come back, you know, I just want to ask of you to take care of our community and try to do what you can, you know, to keep us safe. And then to anybody who's visiting from other parts of the country, you know, please come enjoy Rochester. You know, but we ask that you abide by the quarantine for at least those first 14 days.
Thanks, Kayla. Patty Singer, I know you have a question. Thanks for your patience.
I have so many, Chip. Is the low prevalence a potential problem with only 2% and no herd immunity? You have talked about antibody testing and not real sure about that yet. So to me, it seems like someone who didn't show any antibodies, only 2% prevalence. That worries me, but you're the professional.
Well, you know, we're still early in this, believe it or not. I mean, we've been going at this now for, 6 months, but we are still relatively early in the development of ultimately of herd immunity. And let's just realize that we don't yet know the duration and the extent of immunity from being previously infected. So yes, 2% is on one hand concerning. On the other hand, it's only 2%, which is ultimately reassuring, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is keep people healthy. We want to keep people out of the hospital, keep people well in their homes and able to participate in everything as safely as they possibly can. So I guess it's a double-edged sword. You know, we don't ultimately know the degree of immunity, even though we know the prevalence of infection. So I think those two facets are, you know, details that we'll have to flesh out as the weeks and months go on. But I am ultimately reassured by the fact that we only have a 2% prevalence, because it means that, you know, as we interact and as we gather, the odds are lower than they are in places like Texas and Florida, where the prevalence is much higher. The odds are lower here that we'll have a transmission event because, you know, statistically, we have fewer people in any given group who are infected.
Thanks, Patty. Pat Mucinek from WGC Channel 10. Are you still on the line?
Yep, I'm still here. Dr. Mendoza, I heard what you said about the mandatory quarantine, but let me toss out the question anyway. How is the governor's travel advisory going to be enforced locally?
You know, right now we're focusing on education and prevention. There are vehicles for people to report individuals. There are opportunities for people to report themselves. And we've had a number of people declare themselves as visitors from other states, which we welcome. You know, but our emphasis right now is really on prevention and education and providing guidance. And I have the confidence that that will ultimately prevail. And I know that we always want to think about what happens if, but I think if we focus on the vast majority of people who, through our experience, dating all the way back to February, whether it's through isolation, quarantine, contact tracing, and so forth, the vast majority of this community has been exceedingly cooperative. And I think that that's where we want to continue to focus. I think focusing on the small minority of people who may not be cooperative, I think is really missing the boat. I think we ultimately stand to gain more if we focus on supporting the people who have every intention of being, of being cooperative.
May I ask one more quick question?
If that's okay with Dr. Mendoza, sure.
Sure. I'm free until 2. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Then let me ask it quickly. The governor keeps emphasizing how it's up to local governments to ensure compliance with quarantines, public social distancing, etc. Now, do you have enough resources to do that effectively?
You know, we have been doing this before the epidemic, and the example I'll offer is restaurant inspections for for food safety. You know, we do not have the time or interest in visiting every restaurant every day, because I don't think it's necessary. I think our restaurant community has proven time and again that they can do the right thing, because frankly, on 363 days out of every year, they are. And on the other 2 days that when we're there, they are too. So I think that is the precedent that I think we can, have some confidence in. So do we have the resources to visit every person who's under quarantine every day? No, but we call them and we contact them and we text them, and we've had the resources to do that, thanks to help from the state and the governor's office, we've had the resources to do that. I think in the end, we do have the resources to do what we need to do to keep the public safe and healthy.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Pat. And Dan Track from 13 WHAM TV, want to make sure you get a chance to ask a final question or two.
Thank you. This is kind of a follow-up to a combination of some of the previous questions. We are coming up on the 4th of July holiday, and you stated that we've done pretty well in the past holiday, just a little over a month ago, and with the protests and everything. However, we're heading into hot weather territory. We undoubtedly are going to see people not follow these travel restrictions from these 16 states. We are undoubtedly going to see people break those rules and drive into New York to be with family and to be with friends. Do you see any issue of any sort of increase or potential increase 2 weeks from now after this incubation period?
Well, every time something happens, we're always preparing for 2 weeks from now. And so this won't be our first rodeo. We were bracing ourselves, if you will, on Memorial Day weekend for what might happen 2 weeks from that point. And thankfully, what we were worried about didn't happen to happen. And, we are doing the same thing now. We're looking ahead 2 weeks from now, making sure that we have all the staffing that we need to do to have in place to do all of the case investigations and contact tracing. Because, an increase in cases in and of itself is only an early indicator of all the things that we care ultimately about. We want to prevent a surge in hospitals. We certainly want to prevent exposures to, people who are vulnerable, older individuals, people with chronic medical conditions, and certainly anybody in a nursing home. So, if we can have more cases and isolate them, that's much preferable than having cases that we identify that we're not able to trace. So, we certainly don't want to see more cases if we can avoid it, but we're going to prepare ourselves in the event that we do. Because, if there's anything reassuring so far, it's the vast majority of 20 and 30-year-olds who've gotten ill have not needed to go to the hospital and have not experienced really any short-term bad outcomes. So, if we had to choose our battles, I would rather, try to prevent ultimately what's going to cause significant morbidity and mortality among the vulnerable and the high-risk groups. But at this point, we're just, preparing. That's all we can do. We've got to have the people in place, and we're preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And Patty and Kayla, I want to give you one final chance in our final 4 minutes of we have an additional question.
All right. A quick kind of science lesson. If the virus goes through droplets, which means it's kind of water, either soluble or transmissible, I don't understand why spray parks and swimming pools are open. Can you briefly say why there wouldn't be a big threat if we're dealing with something that travels in moisture?
Well, so the moisture has to come from a person first. That's the most important thing. So once it lands on a surface, certainly if it lands in a pool, the virus is dead, because chlorine, we know, is pretty toxic to this virus. So a virus in a pool that's chlorinated is not a virus anymore. what we're looking at is the person-to-person interactions. And so, the person-to-person interactions right next to a swimming pool are just as risky as a person-to-person interaction in a bar or a restaurant. So we've got to be thinking about how do we maintain distance to the extent that we can on the deck of a pool. And, that is the concern, because you can't swim with a mask on, and when you get out of the pool, you're not going to have a mask on. So I ask the people who are going to public pools and to water parks and so forth to maintain distance until they can get that mask on, because ultimately it's the person-to-person spread of respiratory droplets that has been shown to be the most high-risk mechanism for transmitting infection.
And as soon as you explained it, it sounds so obvious. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot for doing it. I appreciate it.
Kayla, do you have a final question?
Yes, I do. So also something the governor mentioned is that when he had been in New York City in the past few days, he noticed a lot of groups together not wearing masks, and he had concern for that. So I was just wondering, from what you've seen around here, do you have any concerns similar to that for our region?
I am concerned because ultimately I want us all to be healthy, and I want the county to avoid all of what we experienced earlier this year and all of what other states are experiencing now. Right now, I'd love to see more people masking, but at the end of the day, we have quite enough because we haven't seen these surges. If the prevalence in our community goes up, we are going to have a higher mask compliance rate in order to keep the curve flat. That's just math. Okay, but right now it is somewhat reassuring that we have that low prevalence rate. So we can tolerate a somewhat lower mask prevalence rate. But I don't want to, falsely reassure anybody, because the challenge with this virus is by the time we see a surge, it might already be too late, because we also know that it takes on average 3 weeks for people to make a behavior a habit. And so I want people to make the habit of wearing a mask now, because that is the most protective way that we can blunt any surges that might happen. By the time a surge happens, the wheels are already in motion, and it's going to be very hard just by human nature to develop a habit that quickly. And so what I am asking the entire community is to develop that habit now. I think it's very likely that we will need to have that habit in place, because I don't see us getting through this without seeing a surge or a bump or a spike in some fashion in these numbers at some point. I think we've been very fortunate up until this point to see the curve flatten and to see relatively low numbers right now. And I just don't want us to lull ourselves into complacency to think that this is always going to be this way and that we can just bank on it without ongoing commitment. And so I think we need to have that commitment, and it's got to be something that we all do together.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I want to thank everyone in the media for joining us today. Especially want to thank Dr. Michael Mendoza, the Monroe County Commissioner of Public Health, for talking about our upcoming vaccine trial and many other issues related to COVID-19 in the community. Our ASL interpreters, Will and Chris, along with Morgan Underwood. Max Reckert was on the Zoom today. Jeff Mead, as always, did a great job on camera. And Mark Michaud, thanks for setting this up. And we'll end the meeting now and see everyone again next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.